Marcus Webb walked past me without even glancing in my direction, his hand extended to everyone in the line, firm grips, practiced smiles, a rehearsed joke that made the junior executives laugh too loudly. When he reached me, I held my hand out, steady, professional, waiting. He looked at my hand like it was something offensive, then at my face. Then he kept walking. "We don't shake hands with people who won't be around next week." He said it without stopping, without turning, without any hesitation at all. The sentence hit me harder than any termination letter ever could. A few people behind me laughed, nervous, obedient. Someone coughed into their sleeve. No one said my name. My name is Victoria Chen. For 12 years I operated in the space where decisions became permanent, capital approvals, risk controls, contractual safeguards that never made headlines but kept Meridian Capital Partners standing when confidence collapsed around us. I was the final checkpoint, the last signature before money moved, the invisible wall between the company and catastrophic loss. I wasn't loud. I was precise. Marcus Webb was loud enough for the entire building. He took his place at the head of the conference table, still standing, still smirking, that Hollywood smile that looked more like a threat than a greeting. "Let's be efficient," he said, adjusting his cufflinks like a man who believed appearance was synonymous with authority. "We're entering a new era of leadership culture. That means eliminating legacy positions that don't align with where we're going." His eyes flickered toward me, cold, dismissive, like I was furniture that clashed with his new aesthetic. "Effective immediately," he announced, and the room went silent. Victoria Chen's role has been phased out. No meeting, no warning, no conversation, just a sentence dropped like a guillotine blade in front of 40 people who suddenly became very interested in their notebooks. I stood up, not because I was shaken, but because my legs felt too steady for how much they wanted to put my heel through his skull. HR walked up, 2 of them, young, avoiding eye contact, holding a glossy folder like they were delivering last rites. I took it, opened it, scanned to the termination page. "I'll need a printed copy," I said calmly. Marcus blinked. "It's all digital now. Printed, with timestamps." HR hesitated. I stared. 3 minutes later, I walked out of that building with paper documentation, a receipt, and the calm of a woman who knew exactly what she had just done. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the moment my signature left that termination form, a silent countdown had begun. Not in my head, in the system. The very system I had designed to protect the company from exactly this kind of reckless leadership. And the best part? He had no idea he'd just armed it. Quick pause here. If you're still listening, you're my kind of listener. Take a second. Notice how you're sitting right now. Adjust your posture if you need to. Feet flat on the floor, spine straight but not stiff, comfortable but present. Now, where are you listening from today? If stories like this one hit different for you, stick around and consider subscribing. It keeps these conversations going, because what happened next didn't happen in that conference room. It started the moment everyone thought it was finished. After the meeting ended, I sat in my car for 17 minutes, not crying, not planning, just letting the memories surface the way they always do when someone tries to erase you. There were nights I stayed until midnight correcting assumptions baked into presentations that would have collapsed deals by morning. I remember rewriting risk language at 2 a.m. because some junior VP wanted speed more than accuracy. I remember signing off on safeguards that prevented regulatory penalties no one ever heard about. Those moments never came with praise. They came with silence. I accepted it because the work was the point. Marcus Webb arrived after most of that work was already done. He inherited stability and called it his vision. He stepped into rooms where the hardest decisions had already been made and spoke as if clarity had always existed. Deals I structured from the ground up became his talking points once he shook the right hands. He took credit with a confidence that suggested he believed it was earned simply by showing up last. His resume was spotless. Wharton, 2 failed startups that he somehow spun as learning experiences, a TED Talk about disruption that had more buzzwords than substance. He trusted labels more than language, headlines more than footnotes. Contracts to him were formalities handled by other people. Authority, he believed, flowed downward from the name on the door. Sitting there in my car, replaying his words, I realized something uncomfortable and precise. Marcus Webb didn't know who I was. Not really. He didn't know what I controlled, what required my signature, what would stop moving the moment I was no longer there. He saw a role, not a system, a cost, not a lever. That wasn't just arrogance. That was negligence dressed up as confidence. I opened my laptop, not out of panic, out of habit. My inbox was quiet except for one search result I hadn't looked at in years. An old thread surfaced, dated before Marcus's arrival, flagged and archived. The subject line was unremarkable. Inside was confirmation of delegated authority tied to capital release protocols, written clearly, approved cleanly, never rescinded. Marcus's name wasn't on it. Mine was. I sat back, felt the weight shift. The anger didn't spike. It narrowed. Years of being overlooked compressed into a single undeniable fact. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had removed the only person who understood where the real weight sat. That realization didn't restore my dignity. It sharpened it. If you've ever been treated like you were disposable, this story is for you. I didn't rush to do anything that night. Calm arrived first. Not as relief, as structure. I sat with the facts and let them align the way they always had. I wasn't just a former employee. I was the final checkpoint. The managing signatory on capital release protocols that required dual authorization, one key held by the CFO, the other key held by me. Years earlier, during a volatile acquisition cycle, legal had insisted on a single point of authorization for emergency capital movement. Speed demanded clarity. Clarity demanded one signature. Mine. I reviewed the covenants, the release conditions, the reputational safeguards. I had argued for language that could stop money mid-transfer if conduct during negotiations caused material harm. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical. The clause was clean and specific. Capital could be withdrawn immediately if documented behavior by leadership undermined institutional trust or standing. No warnings, no cure period, no committee vote. The authority sat with the managing signatory, me. I confirmed it once more. Reading slowly, without emotion. Marcus Webb had never read it. He treated appendices as administrative noise. He trusted summaries and delegated the rest. To him, contracts were rails already laid, not systems that required inspection. He believed procedure existed to support power, not restrain it. That belief had made him comfortable. I checked the records next. The meeting, the handshake he refused, the words he said, the termination. Every second had been captured on video. Meridian Capital recorded executive sessions as standard governance practice, archived automatically, retained for compliance review. Marcus knew that policy. He just didn't respect it. Control doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like silence narrowing into certainty. I understood with precision how few steps remained. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger clouds sequencing. This required order. I documented the facts. Time, language, participants, saved the file, labeled it clearly, closed my laptop. Nothing impulsive, nothing emotional. Jack thought authority was something you assert. I knew it was something you exercise. He had removed me because he believed I was ornamental. In doing so, he had activated the only mechanism that didn't require his approval. The clause didn't care about intent, only impact. The impact had been recorded, preserved, and signed by his own arrogance. When I stood up that evening, my hands were steady. The system was already primed. I just hadn't told it to move yet. I waited until the building was quiet, not empty, just quiet enough that no one expected anything to change. There was no anger left in me, no satisfaction either. Emotion would have slowed the sequence. I didn't have time for drag. I sat at the small desk in my apartment, phone face down, documents open on my screen. I reviewed them once more, not because I doubted them, because precision matters when consequences are permanent. Everything aligned. Authority, scope, trigger, nothing subjective, nothing personal. I turned the phone over and dialed one number. It rang once. Yes, the voice answered. Richard Moore, Chief Compliance Officer at our primary capital partner, a man who understood systems better than people. Execute the withdrawal, I said. Full amount, effective immediately. There was a pause. Professional, brief. No surprise, no protest. Confirmed, he replied. Reason code documented. Conduct during negotiations undermining institutional confidence. Understood. That was the entire conversation. No warnings issued, no leverage displayed. I didn't explain what had happened. Explanations invite debate. Debate was no longer relevant. The framework had already decided. I ended the call and closed the file. The system didn't need supervision. It needed initiation. Somewhere far from my apartment, processes were already moving. Notifications generated, balances recalculated, dependencies exposed. No one was being punished. A condition had simply been met. I stood up and washed my hands, noticing how ordinary the moment felt. No shaking, no adrenaline, just completion. The kind that comes from finishing a checklist you built yourself years earlier. Minutes later, my phone vibrated. Then again. I didn't look. Confirmation wasn't necessary. I knew how quickly capital reacts when certainty disappears. Liquidity doesn't argue. It withdraws. What Marcus Webb believed was stability had been contingent all along. He just never bothered to ask on whose terms. He thought my removal was an ending. It was a release. By the time midnight passed, the withdrawal was final. No appeal window, no courtesy delay. The door everyone assumed was bolted shut had been designed to open outward. I slept without setting an alarm. The outcome was already traveling through systems that don't pause for ego. By morning, it would arrive everywhere at once, and nothing I felt or didn't feel would change what had already been executed. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't relief, it was alignment restored, risk corrected, a boundary enforced without ceremony. I understood then that restraint is its own form of power. You don't raise your voice when the system is listening. You speak once, clearly, and let structure do the rest. That night, nothing dramatic happened in my apartment. Everything dramatic happened elsewhere, exactly as designed. Marcus Webb walked into the office the next morning with the confidence of a man who believed the hardest part was already behind him. His jacket was crisp, his expression relaxed, his stride unhurried. He greeted assistants by first name, nodded at managers, moved toward his glass-walled office like the building itself belonged to him. Whatever discomfort yesterday had created, he clearly believed it had passed. It hadn't. The first call came before he could set his bag down. He waved it away, smiling, let it ring. The second call followed immediately, then a third. This time he answered. Still casual, until his expression tightened. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the shift. I had seen that look before. The moment confidence meets information, it can't absorb fast enough. By mid-morning, doors were closing. Legal convened an emergency session. Finance stopped sending routine updates and started requesting confirmations that should have been automatic. Marcus's calendar quietly emptied itself as meetings were canceled without explanation. Then the number surfaced. $1.9 billion no longer sat where the projections said it would. Not delayed, not reallocated, gone. Entire forecasts unraveled in seconds, assumptions collapsing because they had been built on certainty that no longer existed. This wasn't an accounting error. It wasn't a technical glitch. It was absence. Marcus tried to label it a disruption, used words like temporary and correctable, but every call pushed him further from that story. Banks didn't ask questions, they asked for statements. Legal didn't offer options, they outlined exposure. Each conversation narrowed his range of motion. Somewhere between the third and fourth briefing, understanding arrived. Not fully formed, but sharp enough to hurt. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. It had been waiting. Before Marcus could speak publicly, the market moved. Pre-opening indicators dipped, then slid further as analysts connected pieces faster than executives could respond. Confidence reacts quicker than leadership. By the time the first internal alert crossed channels, the narrative had already escaped. People began watching him differently, not with hostility, with calculation. He had entered the morning as a decision-maker. By noon, he was a variable. I didn't need updates to know how it felt inside that building. Chain reactions are predictable when you understand leverage. One withdrawal exposes another, and another, until momentum turns against itself. Marcus had thought authority insulated him from consequence. That morning taught him otherwise. By the time he prepared a statement, the story had already been written elsewhere. Without his voice. I didn't expect Marcus Webb to call me himself. When his name appeared on my phone, I knew the performance was over. The negotiation had begun. His voice was smooth, careful, almost friendly. "Let's talk," he said, as if we hadn't already done exactly that. He started with incentives, a consulting role, a transition package, public acknowledgement of my contributions. "We moved too fast," he said, rehearsed humility layered over desperation. "There's room to rebuild here." I let him finish. When he paused, I asked a single question. "Put it in writing." He didn't like that. The tone shifted. His words hardened. "You can't just pull money like that," he said. "There are consequences." I answered with dates, clauses, the exact language he had ignored. Silence followed. He tried again, louder this time. "You embarrassed the company." I corrected him calmly. "The meeting was recorded. Your conduct triggered the clause? Nothing else." That was when he stopped pretending. He blamed advisors, he blamed timing, he blamed me. "If you hadn't reacted," he said, "none of this would have happened." I didn't interrupt. I waited until the accusation finished. Then I said very calmly, "Your behavior met the documented threshold. The system responded accordingly. I didn't pull anything. I authorized what was already written." He went quiet, not reflective, calculating. "What would it take to fix this?" he asked. I told him there was nothing to fix. The process had executed. The framework had decided. He exhaled, sharp, frustrated. "You planned this," he said. I answered truthfully. "I prepared for it." "There's a difference." The call ended without agreement. Minutes later, messages started arriving from board members. Legal asking for context. The questions weren't about the withdrawal anymore. They were about Marcus's judgment, about the meeting, about why no one had intervened. By afternoon, the board convened without him. I knew because the agenda had familiar language: governance, risk, conduct. Marcus tried calling again. I declined. The conversation had moved past persuasion. He had wanted authority without restraint. Now restraint was examining him. When I finally received confirmation that the board was reviewing his behavior during the meeting, I felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, just tension settling into inevitability. Marcus Webb had come looking for leverage. He found accountability. The room he had dominated was now measuring him, and this time he wasn't controlling the narrative. The system was. I wasn't invited when the board reconvened, and that told me everything. The tone had shifted before a single word was spoken. Someone reopened the recording of the termination meeting. The room went quiet. My absence no longer mattered. The footage did. The video played without commentary at first. Marcus Webb's entrance, his smile, the way he shook every hand except mine, the pause, then his voice, crisp, dismissive. "We don't shake hands with people who won't be around next week." A few chuckles followed on the recording. Someone on the board coughed. Another voice murmured something inaudible. The screen kept going. They watched him fire me publicly. They watched him posture. They watched him enjoy it. What had felt humiliating in the moment now read as reckless. One director leaned forward. "Why was this on record?" Another asked. "Did anyone try to intervene?" No one answered. The conversation moved away from me without ceremony. My name surfaced only as context, then disappeared. What replaced it was language I recognized: exposure, optics, governance failure. Someone said, "This isn't about her." Another replied, "It's about leadership risk." Marcus wasn't in the room. That absence carried weight. They replayed the moment again, stopping on his expression. "This is contempt," one director said. Another added, "And it's documented." Silence followed, heavier than agreement. I listened to updates afterward, not through drama, through process. Legal outlined implications. Finance explained market reactions. Communications asked whether any response could contain the damage. The answer came back evenly: the market has already responded. Then the suggestion surfaced, almost gently: "We should consider a confidential vote. No outrage, no defense, just procedure." Someone asked, "Secret ballot?" The reply was immediate: "Yes." That was the shift. When institutions stop debating intent and start measuring liability, outcomes become mechanical. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle, not pleasure, alignment. This wasn't vindication, it was correction. By the time the session ended, No one spoke about reconciliation. They spoke about succession planning, interim authority, timelines. Marcus Webb had built his authority on tone and speed. In that room, tone had turned against him. Speed now worked elsewhere. I didn't need to be present to know how it ended. When a board changes its language, the decision has already begun. All that remains is the vote, counted in silence. It happened without applause, without speeches, without mercy. That was the part I respected. Institutions correct quietly when they are serious. I closed my notes, thanked no one, and waited. What they called governance I recognized as gravity. Once it pulls, nothing argues. Marcus would learn that next, in private, with no audience to save him. I learned about the freeze before Marcus Webb did. That detail mattered, because it meant the center of gravity had already shifted. Power doesn't announce itself when it's leaving. It simply stops responding. Marcus was still holding meetings, still issuing directives, still signing documents that would never take effect. The board's decision came quietly, framed as precaution. His operational authority was suspended pending review. No alerts, no speeches, just a recalibration that removed his hands from the controls. The effect was immediate. Executives who had deferred yesterday now asked permission twice. Decisions slowed, then stalled. Legal approved nothing without written confirmation from interim leadership. Finance redirected questions upward and received nothing back. Marcus's office lights stayed on, but the building no longer moved around him. Then the media arrived, not aggressively, not yet. Requests for comment, questions about liquidity, about leadership continuity. Marcus attempted reassurance, but his words had lost friction. Statements drafted under his name waited for approval that never came. I watched the coverage without reaction. Satisfaction didn't feel warm. It felt exact. This was what happens when authority is borrowed and suddenly recalled. The image remains. The function is gone. By afternoon, Communications issued a revised release outlining the company's forward strategy. I read it once, then again. Something was missing. Marcus Webb's name had been removed. No explanation, just absence. Interim leadership was referenced instead. Neutral, temporary. That omission carried more weight than any announcement. It told investors what the board would not say aloud. Marcus was no longer the future they were willing to attach themselves to. He tried to re-enter the process. Scheduling briefings, requesting alignment conversations. Calendars declined him automatically. Assistants redirected him gently. The machine had updated its permissions. I felt a quiet completion settle in. Not triumph, not revenge. Alignment. Systems were doing what they were designed to do once noise was stripped away. Marcus Webb had believed control could be seized quickly and stabilized later. He never reached the later. By the time he understood what had changed, the chair beneath him was already moving, inch by inch, without ceremony. There were no cheers, no confrontation, just subtraction. And subtraction, when applied at the top, changes everything below it. The decision arrived without drama. Delivered in language so procedural it felt antiseptic. Marcus Webb was removed following a formal vote, documented, reviewed, signed by board consensus. No accusations were announced, no apologies offered, just a conclusion reached through policy, exactly the way he always insisted everything should work. He walked out later that day, carrying a thin folder, escorted by process rather than security. The hallway stayed quiet. No one stood. No one extended a hand. Conversations continued at lower volume, careful not to acknowledge the moment. The same room that once laughed at his jokes now avoided eye contact. It wasn't hostility. It was recognition. I wasn't present, but I didn't need to be. Endings like that are predictable when authority collapses inward. Marcus had demanded efficiency and received it. His exit followed the handbook he trusted, stripped of ceremony, and witnesses. The call to me came afterward, polite, urgent, respectful in a way it hadn't been before. They offered everything: my title restored, expanded authority, public acknowledgement, compensation adjusted beyond anything reasonable. They framed it as stability, as continuity, as correction. I listened without interrupting, asked questions about timelines, scope, governance. They answered carefully, eager now. When they finished, there was a pause, waiting for relief. I declined, not out of spite, Not out of pride, out of clarity. Returning would blur the lesson. It would turn consequence into negotiation, and that would cheapen what had just occurred. They tried again. Softer. "We need you," I replied evenly. "You needed me before." Silence followed, long enough to feel permanent. Justice doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't humiliate. It completes a sequence and steps aside. Marcus Webb learned that too late. I learned it long ago. I closed the conversation and set my phone down. The system had corrected itself. My role in it was finished. Declining wasn't loss. It was alignment. I moved forward without announcements, without statements, without looking back. The space Marcus left would fill itself. It always does. The handshake he refused never mattered. What mattered was the structure that noticed, recorded, and responded, coldly, completely. I understood then why restraint endures longer than victory. When outcomes are earned through process, they don't invite reversal. 3 weeks later, I walked into a different building, smaller, quieter, mine. The sign on the door was simple, black letters on frosted glass. Chen Advisory Group. No fanfare, no press release, just keys in hand and systems I actually trusted. The office was modest. 5th floor, view of the city. My desk faced the window. Not by accident. Funding came from former clients who had left Meridian with a sour taste and airtight NDAs. They reached out, said they were tired of chaos disguised as innovation, didn't want buzzwords, wanted execution. They knew I delivered. Day 1 was already profitable. Day 2 was already booked. Day 3 was already being whispered about in circles that mattered. Across town, Meridian Capital was still restructuring. Legal fees were mounting. Vendor relationships were strained. The quarterly report would be late for the first time in 7 years. Marcus Webb updated his LinkedIn to Exploring Strategic Opportunities. I saw the notification and almost smiled. His crisis became my credibility. His failure became my foundation. Not because I engineered it, because I understood where the real weight sat. And I never let go of the keys. I didn't announce my next step. I simply took it. When the noise faded and the calls stopped, a quiet path opened, one that felt earned rather than offered. I moved toward work that respected boundaries, language that meant what it said, agreements that treated dignity as operational, not optional. I began again without spectacle. New partners, clear terms, no shortcuts disguised as confidence. I chose rooms where preparation mattered more than volume, where decisions were made with care for consequences that outlast applause. The change wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate, and it held. Looking back, the lesson wasn't about Marcus Webb or a conference room moment. It was about cost. Real power doesn't perform. It doesn't announce itself with gestures or titles. It sits quietly in structure, in signatures, in the discipline to read what others skip. When it moves, it does so without asking permission. Respect works the same way. It isn't a courtesy extended after the fact. It's the price of entry. You pay it up front, or you pay later, with interest. Systems remember what people forget. They enforce what culture pretends to excuse. I didn't need vindication, I needed alignment. The sequence completed itself once conditions were met. No celebration followed, because none was required. The outcome spoke in numbers, in minutes, in changes that held even when attention moved on. I carry that forward now. Building in places where the rules are clear and consequences are real. Choosing partners who understand that silence can be strength, that restraint can be decisive. I don't rush decisions. I design them to last. The work continues, steadier and cleaner than before. And if there's one truth worth keeping, it's this. Authority that demands respect has already lost it. Respect is not symbolic. It is enforceable. I learned to trust processes over promises, records over recollections, calm over reaction. Each choice narrowed risk and widened purpose. The future I chose rewards preparation, not bravado. It keeps score without commentary, leaving outcomes intact long after voices fade. That is the cost, paid every time. The real lesson wasn't about losing a job or winning a confrontation. It was about understanding where value truly lives and protecting it quietly. I learned that dignity isn't something you demand in the moment. It's something you build into your work, long before anyone tests it. Emotion matters, but discipline lasts. When you choose clarity over noise, preparation over pride, outcomes have a way of correcting themselves. I'm curious what detail in this story stayed with you the most. Was it the refused handshake? The clause no one read? The moment the system responded? If you've lived through something similar, would you share your story with me? Where are you listening from today? If this resonated, please leave a comment. Tap like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, honest, human, and grounded, consider subscribing. Your support keeps these conversations going, because systems remember, even when people want to forget, and the ones who build carefully always outlast the ones who perform loudly. That's the truth Marcus Webb learned too late. That's the truth I carry forward. Restraint is not weakness. It's the longest game there is. And I'm just getting started.